welcome, Nick, to the Sanctus podcast.
Hello, James. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Do you want to start just by telling us a little bit about who you are?
Oh, I can. That's quite a question.
It is a big question, isn't it?
Who am I as a person? Okay, I'll tell you what the job I've done for the last 2 years.
Maybe start with job,
Yeah, that's probably a good start, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so my name's Nick. Grew up in Buckinghamshire, now living in London. For the last 2 years, I have been working for the London Ambulance Service as a registered paramedic. Full-time, night shifts, day shifts, late shifts, every shift you can think of, really. And yeah, as a newly qualified paramedic, out on the streets of London, responding to sort of calls, every beck and call that's all going, sorts. Really. Yeah, all sorts. Yeah. It's been an experience. You know, the learning curve is huge. But over the last 2 years, I could say, blimey, the amount I've grown, I think, as a person, just from the things I've gone to, the way I've had to respond to things, you know, you just don't know what you're going to next. So, me as a person, what do I do outside of my job? Why not? Let me tell you. So I enjoy fitness, friends, that's very important to me. Family is also a very big one. And I've recently resigned from my full-time job as a paramedic, and I've gone to start a business, but I'm still doing occasional shifts monthly. Got you. So it's good. No, I'm enjoying it. Really, really good.
Well, thank you. I wanted to try something a little bit different today, actually. I've just noticed when we've done the last few podcasts recently, the energy's been very high, and we've been very, very excited. So I wanted to start by just doing something that we often do at Sanctus called like a one-word check-in. You might have done it where you just say one word to describe the quality of how you feel, and it just gets you in the room. So I'll go for mine first.
Wait, can you just tilt your mic up slightly?
Oh shit. That's my one-word check-in. Shit. How about that?
Huh? Yeah. Is that the word?
I'll describe the one-word check-in again because it's very useful. Yeah. Just want to try something a little bit different, which we often do at Sanctus, just to kind of get us in the room. And it's just a one-word check-in. Just describe how you feel, one word in this moment, and it just helps to kind of slow us down. Or else, I don't know about you, but I always end up in this room for some reason. I always end up having conversations that are like 10,000 miles an hour.
Something about the room.
I think it's because we often do lots of kind of meetings and whatnot in here. So, how do I feel in the moment right now? I'm going to say present.
Present. Not bad. Good choice. I was going to say tuned.
Tuned.
I feel quite in tune with my emotions today.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good. And thank you for your introduction.
That's okay.
Excited to hear more about the life of a paramedic. But before we kind of get onto that, what's been your connection to mental health?
What's been my connection to mental health? So it's a tricky one, really. I think ever since I was younger, I've always sort of realised that I've always been a bit more nervous than everybody else, if that makes sense. The night before an exam or, I don't know, any sort of big event, I'd always be thinking, I'd say to my friends when I was younger, I'd say, God, I'm so nervous about tomorrow. Do you? And they're like, no, not really. And I think, God, my tummy's doing somersaults. I've got butterflies like 1,000,000 miles an hour. I think, God, I feel like I'm different to everybody else. It's really odd. And I think amongst my family, we all sort of feel that kind of like pre-nerves to almost everything, if that makes sense. And I've always been somebody that will put myself out there in terms of, I don't know, something as silly as like the school show or something like that. But then I think, why do I do it to myself? Because I just get awful churny tummy, kind of like anxiety feeling. So I've always had that sort of every sort of step of my life, really. And then back in 2013, I was on a gap year before starting university to start my paramedic training. I had some surgery, and unfortunately the surgery had a couple of complications, and I ended up with a little bit of chronic pain for 2 years. Now, to be perfectly honest, looking back now, the pain itself wasn't even that bad, but for some reason, there was just a trigger in terms of my emotion, my anxiety. From that point onwards, you know, I always sort of describe it as like an anxious loop. You know, I was just, silly thoughts were just going through my head day in, day out. Will this go? You know, is it going to get worse? Is it going to stop me being the person I am? And before I knew it, really, I was in this sort of horrible downward spiral of anxiety and feeling like I was in a bubble, like the only way I can explain it is just my brain was so preoccupied with other thought that I was never really in the moment of anything else. You know, I had a part-time job at the time at a pharmacy, and I remember the first day going back after having the surgery, and I thought, I feel fine to be here, but my head is just not the same. You know, I just feel like I can't focus on things. I've got that horrible churny tummy pre-event nerves that I described when I was younger, but it was the actual sort of feeling that my brain was just disconnected from anything else. That was the one big thing.
And what were the thoughts that were going around in the anxious loop?
So my actual specific thoughts were things like, gosh, am I going to be able to walk and run like I used to love, which was ridiculous because I was walking every single day. You know, I'd even been on lots of runs. But for some reason, my brain had just fixated on these ridiculous kind of outcomes. And I knew that I was about to start paramedic training. So I knew that I had to be in decent kind of shape, really, to be able to progress. And I think I possibly put my nerves about starting university, and I put that in the position of, is it the pain rather than anything else, if that makes sense. So that was my main kind of big experience with mental health. I've always had an interest in it, actually. I found it fascinating, and I think I've always thought there's got to be more to mental health than current society lets on, if that makes sense. You know, it's like you're
there's
either
some big
fit.
secret.
Exactly. It's like, and I think through that moment I felt so isolated because I'd never experienced these bubble-like sensations ever before. I'd never heard about it at school. You know, people might say, oh, they're suffering with depression, but I didn't know what that meant, you know.
You didn't know the feelings that underline that.
And, you know, I've never been described what this feeling was. I thought, am I going to spend the rest of my life feeling like this? You know, am I ever going to be the same old Nick that I was before I had this operation? And it was a really hard time, actually. You know, I'd say probably 10 to 12 months of just feeling absolute crap, to be perfectly honest with you.
So you had this kind of anxious loop in this disconnect between your head and the rest of your body almost. And but then also you described like the kind of bodily symptoms of churned stomach.
Yeah, so as soon as I've got anything new, anything kind of different, even today, I'll always know. My tummy's the first to tell me because I'll get a churny tummy. I feel a bit sweaty in the hands. And I start to sort of almost disconnect from my environment and get very caught up with my own thoughts in my head, if that makes sense. And it's a horrible feeling. But I'd say looking back, which I'm sure we can touch on later, I'd say it's probably one of the best things that's ever happened to me because it's absolutely opened my eyes 100%, because now I can use that energy. I know how to deal with it, which I can talk about later on. And actually, I think this anxious trait in me is probably puts me above other people because it means that I will think about everything 101 times more than maybe somebody else who's not particularly anxious about this event or whatever.
And were you sharing how you felt with anyone at the time?
So I was very close to my parents. Still am. Don't know why I said it. I was. Sorry, Mum. And I was telling them how I felt. And there's a family history of anxiety, so they did understand. But at the same time, I never felt like they understood, or even sort of my friends, because although they know what it feels like, when you're in that moment of panic and that moment of feeling absolutely awful, it feels like no one else can understand how you're feeling because it is so rubbish. And I reach out to friends, and because it was kind of like a medical trigger for me, although I've always felt anxious, and looking back, I had that feeling before every big event I ever went to, really.
Sorry to interrupt, but was it the medical trigger then? Because you mentioned just briefly before that it might have been a kind of actually the nerves about starting university and becoming a paramedic almost manifested in the.
So I think that definitely has something to do with it, because I knew that I was starting university, but I never really felt particularly nervous about starting university, which sounds absolutely bizarre considering what I've just said about normally getting anxious. But I don't know, I wasn't too worried until nearer the time, like the night before kind of thing. But actually, when I had the surgery, all my kind of like looping thoughts were, is this pain ever going to go?
Yeah.
You know, am I going to be able to lead a normal life? Am I going to be able to run, go to the gym like I will? You know, can I get fit? Can I do this? And, you know, and I think then once you get into that state, it's ridiculous because then you start getting anxious about that feeling, you know, and then it would sort of spiral off into another loop in terms of, gosh, am I going to feel anxious for the rest of my life? So now the pain's not even an anxiety anymore. I'm now anxious about being anxious about the pain, which is just sort of levels on levels on levels. It's like a dream within a dream. But and that was then possibly over the next sort of second half of the year of feeling a bit rubbish. That was the big anxiety for me in terms of, gosh, am I ever going to get over this feeling of can't stop thinking about things, or am I always going to feel churny tummy? Am I going to always feel this horrible bubble feeling in my brain, you know? And I think that was even worse than the feeling of, is this pain going to go kind of thing. But no, it was not a nice time. Not a nice time.
And what was the bridge then between that period and becoming a paramedic and training?
As in...
So that was before...
So that was in my gap year, before starting training. And then I had lots of up and downs in that actual year, to be perfectly honest. And I went to uni with this kind of like negative
the merry-go-round of thoughts. And how did you overcome that then in the end?
So I started uni, and I think I had some, looking back now, I think I did have a couple of months where actually it kind of like settled on its own accord without me really knowing why it settled.
Right.
And then when I was at uni, it started sort of, I'd noticed like a tweaky pain, which wasn't even that bad now. You know, most people would probably shrug it off, but that was then a trigger. And I felt myself back in this loop. Spoke to my GP. They even offered me sort of medication to try and help. Wasn't particularly keen on it, although I've seen firsthand how helpful it can be in some situations. So I'm not against it. But for me, I didn't want to go down that route straight away. So I've been referred to sort of pain specialists and things, and nothing was really, really helping. And then I eventually went, oh, do you know what? I'm going to go to the uni counsellor. So I went to the uni counsellor, absolutely anxious as anything. I thought, oh my goodness, what am I doing? You know, I'd sit in a room and I don't know, I'd look around and think, gosh, what are these people going through? You know?
Were you nervous before going to that counselling session?
Yeah, terrified, absolutely terrified.
What were you afraid of?
I don't know. I think there's like a label thing. Back then, I thought, gosh, I don't want to be that person that needs that help. You know, I want to be the person that I felt what was like normal to everybody else. You know, my friends weren't having to go and do this that I knew. Why do I have this? You know, that's what I kind of felt, almost a sense of guilt. It was a strange sensation. So I went to her and I told her my story. I had a good cry, which was very much needed. It's okay, men, we can cry, it's fine. And she listened to me. She said, yeah, okay. You know, she commented on a few things that I'd said that were specific to what my story was.
Right.
And then she said at the end, she went, okay, what I want you to do is download a mindfulness app. I said, all right, okay, fine. And do you know what? I just walked out of that place and I thought, why did I bother? You know, I've gone and spoke to someone who's listened to me, nodded their head, said yes, and told me to download an app on my phone. I thought, great, no help, thanks a lot, kind of thing. Went home, anxious as ever. I called my mum, had another good cry, and I went home and I went, well, I've kind of got no options really but to download this app and go through it. You know, I thought, you know, my whole world felt like it was crashing down around me, and I've now got to download an app that's going to save my life, kind of thing. I thought...
Sounds like you were very sceptical then.
Oh, I was extremely sceptical. I thought I'd been cheated on, really. I thought like I was now going to be in this bracket of people where they don't really know what to do with you. So, you know...
Felt like you'd kind of been like...
Yeah, have an app, that would shut me up for a few weeks.
Yeah. They'd ticked a box and they'd seen you. And
exactly, and that's exactly how I felt. She told me to come back to her 2 months later. And I thought, two months? Gosh. Yeah. But she was going to phone me in 2 weeks. Okay. I was like, okay, fine. That sounds like a good plan. But she wanted me to have 8 weeks of this app. And then...
And what was the app?
It was Headspace.
Headspace, okay.
So I downloaded it. And gosh, it changed my life, honestly. I thought this woman had cheated me with this technique that was a load of rubbish. You know, what does breathing do? You know, that's what I was thinking. I was going through my mind. I was thought, hang on a minute, I've got a problem here, and I'm now listening to some guy telling me to breathe and focus on my breath. That's not going to change how I'm feeling. But actually, I think that was probably the best thing I have ever learned in my entire university degree. No, I'm kidding. Paramedic skills are very good too. But
what was so transformative about meditation or mindfulness in general?
So initially, I would literally, I'd be in my car and I would just be thinking. I'll be thinking. And, you know, loop. You know, I can't stop thinking about these negative thoughts. And although it says to do it kind of like once a day, I thought, do you know what? I need to find a way to get myself out of this loop. You know, I need to find something that I can do. So I went through weeks of just trying to distract myself with things, which never works. It didn't work for me anyway. And so I'd do the mindfulness, and I would have sort of like a moment of calm. And I thought, do you know what? In that moment, I wasn't thinking about what I've been worrying about. Just in that one split moment, I wasn't thinking about the things that I've been worrying about for the last 12 months. And so I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to apply that to every single day. So if I noticed that I was having like a kind of like negative spell, that would be it. In that moment, right there and then, no matter what I was doing, I would just go, right, bring it back to my breathing, focus on my breath, do what that guy on my phone tells me to do, and just breathe. And initially, I didn't really notice a difference, but using that technique day in, day out for a good few weeks, I was having more good days than I was bad. And, you know, it wasn't a magic wand. It's not like suddenly I woke up the next day cured, a Superman kind of thing. But actually, it's given me a mechanism to deal with these emotions when they happen. You know, sometimes I feel happy, sometimes I feel sad, and sometimes I feel really anxious. And it was the anxious ones that I just didn't really know how to deal with. And now I've got this mechanism that I can deal with it, you know, and I know it works because it really helped me. It took me from somebody that was so anxious I couldn't really even think about what I was doing anymore to someone that's starting to feel back to themselves again. And, you know, it really changed my life, to be perfectly honest with you. It really did.
And what did it do then? Because you just said it kind of didn't cure anything, but at the same time, it obviously did make a real difference. So what, you know, how did meditation help you to cope? I've got my own experience of it, which I'd love to share at some point, but I'm curious as to how, you know, the skeptic might say, how does just breathing
definitely
make you feel less anxious? Because those thoughts are still there, so 100%. How does it make a difference?
Yeah, and that's exactly...
And that was probably my voice that I said to myself.
And mine, I thought this is a load of rubbish, you know. And so for me, I needed to find almost an escape from this horrible loop that I was experiencing. And, you know, you have a negative thought. You start getting a bit of a funny tummy from that negative thought. Then you start getting the horrible feeling in your brain. And then you start thinking about the thought again. And you just keep going round in this loop.
And that was your loop.
And that was my loop. And then I would have all these physical sensations that I was experiencing, you know, the kind of like looking around and feeling like, you know, you're not seeing things as they are anymore because you're so caught up in thought. I needed something to actually just get me out of that continual loop. So, for example, I'd have an anxious thought. Yeah, I'd get a funny tummy and it'd feel horrible. But then I would breathe and I'd just have a few moments of breathing. And you know what? Every time it didn't work. There would be some times where I would keep thinking. But actually just having, you know, it was on an app, but having somebody say, if you think about it, that's okay. And having that, I think that was a big turning point is, okay, I've had an anxious thought. I've got a funny tummy and I feel a bit gross in my head, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay to feel like that. And then applying that kind of logic to every time I felt rubbish soon gets you out of the loop and soon gets you feeling, and before you know it, you're back to yourself and you've not even thought about it for
the word I've got coming in my head is like acceptance, you know, much more acceptance of the thoughts that were going in your head, and that's you know, it's okay. You're not like you mentioned before, you're not normal for that.
Exactly.
Which is similar to my experience of not just anxiety, but then also meditation as a was an amazing kind of gateway, really, to start to think about my to think about my mental health, or just appreciate it. I think the first time meditation was probably, journaling and meditation were probably the first things I ever did for my mental health. Before knowing that I was doing it for my mental health, it just felt like something I needed to do. And I remember meditating for the first time and kind of being quite shocked, actually, at how active my mind was. It was terrifying. I was, oh my God, this thing doesn't stop, does it? You know, I was sitting there trying to focus on my breath, noticing that my mind was racing and racing and racing, and to come back to that center and the anchoring of the breath, essentially, felt really, really good. And it still does. Probably something that I'd like to do more of, because I always really feel the benefit. So massively resonate to a similar sort of relationship with meditation, I suppose. All right, yeah. So I'd love to go just from there. I feel like I'm taking it from. I've got this like image in my head of you, like wherever you meditate, in your room or on a seat or on the floor or wherever, I don't know, in the quiet of that. And then I've just got this like loud like siren of an ambulance in my head now, and I'm just so fascinated at how or how that served you in the work that you do now, or if it has, and what's been your experience of, I suppose, of mental health, but also of kind of just like presence and mindfulness being a paramedic.
Definitely. So yeah, sirens are very loud, but luckily
I bet they are. Yeah. Can you meditate with a siren on?
I've never tried, to be honest. Maybe it's something I'll do. I don't know. Maybe I should think about where I'm going first. But no. So I think mindfulness has definitely played a big role in my life throughout my job, my personal life, every kind of emotion. You know, even sometimes if I'm really excited about something, you think, do you know what, just calm it down a little bit, you know, because you need to kind of keep your ups with your lows all kind of steady kind of thing. So I've used it across every aspect of my life. So obviously when I started my job as a paramedic, absolutely terrifying. I mean, I'm sure most of my colleagues will join me in saying it's scary going to 999 calls, and that's okay because, you know, but your training kicks in. We're trained well, we're trained hard, and your training kicks in. I think there's kind of like two aspects of how, personally speaking, I've used my own experiences in my kind of career as a paramedic. So I think, firstly, adopting mindfulness has allowed me to manage my own emotions from more of a personal side, but and actually cope with some of the things that we see as paramedics and the things that we deal with as paramedics. And secondly, the other kind of area I think mindfulness helps is actually I've been through some of the things that I'm being called out for, and then I can see in the people that I attend to, I can see these loops that I know I've experienced, and actually knowing that I've experienced that sometimes gives me a little bit of an edge in actually, when I say I understand, I really do understand. You know, it's all well and good somebody standing next to you says, don't worry, it'll be okay, I understand. And I think if in my time of feeling really, really bad, and, you know, even nowadays I still get anxious days, just like I get happy days. It's just another emotion. But actually, I think when I feel rubbish, having somebody next to me going, yeah, I understand. And I always think, do you though? Do you really understand how I'm feeling? When actually, if I'm going to somebody, I've often shared with patients my experiences in terms of, actually, I've suffered with anxiety, I felt anxious, and this really helps, rather than just being that person sat next to them going, it'll be okay kind of thing. Because it'll be okay is a nice comment, but it's not particularly helpful in that moment kind of thing. Yeah. And, you know, things probably will be okay, but how am I going to be okay? And I think that's what's really important. So I think, obviously, as a paramedic, we do see some pretty horrible things naturally as the job, but we see some lovely things as well. It's a very up and down job in terms of your emotion. So 1 minute you could be picking an elderly person up off the floor because they've fallen out of bed, for example. 2 hours later, you could have another emergency call and be delivering somebody's baby. And then 2 hours after that, you could then be resuscitating somebody in the street, you know. So actually, it's really important to monitor your own mental health as a paramedic, because, you know, 1 minute you are strolling in, talking to some lovely patients, you know, helping them up, making sure they're okay. then you go into a very high intense stress situation where you're dealing with some real acute medical emergencies, and actually that takes its toll on your brain. You know, paramedics are human too. We all feel sad, we all feel happy, we all feel anxious, and I think, me personally, you know, I'm so glad that I've learnt the skill of mindfulness, because actually sometimes when things get to me, because things do get to me, like all my other medical professional colleagues, you know, we're not superhuman. There's nothing in our training that gives us a magic shield that prevents us from our own emotions. It doesn't exist. You know, we still find things sad and we still find things hard to deal with. But just having that mechanism in place that I spoke about earlier, you know, just thinking what thoughts are going on in my brain right now, and am I starting a bit of a cycle, a nasty negative loop that's going to spiral me out in terms of my mental health. And actually just having that skill of mindfulness in the evening when I get home and just go, it's okay, I've had a bit of a rough day and it's all right to feel like this tonight, you know, that's okay, I'm human.
Well, because I can imagine like the day you've just described could be so oscillating between the kind of, you know, something that's quite traumatic and then maybe then actually something that, I'm sure it's all rewarding, but then something that's a little bit more kind of lighthearted and touching it. I imagine it, for me at least, I'm just imagining myself as a paramedic and almost like trying hard not to get tied to everything. Do you know what I mean? Like kind of following everyone and like following their emotions and keeping sight of myself, I suppose.
100%. I think there has to be an element of being a little bit selfish. You know, we do this day in, day out. And like my colleagues who are full-time still, you know, they do it day in, day out. And it's a natural human emotion to distance yourself slightly. I'm not saying that we don't care about people, and I'm not saying that, you know, we're not interested. But there has to be an element where we do step back as professionals so that we can take a good look at the picture and come up with a rational plan. Because, you know, if I went to every 999 call and got emotionally caught up in the ins and outs, I probably couldn't come up with a rational plan to help them and move forward with, you know, the emergency that they've called us for. So there definitely is an element of, you know, we learn to step back and we learn not to take all of these horrible situations home with us. You know, I'll be honest, there'll be some days where I won't think about the calls I've been to again that day, because if I did, gosh, I couldn't be a paramedic. You know, there has to be an element of, I've let that one go, you know. And it sounds selfish and it sounds a bit horrible, you know. Because
I don't think so. I think for me as, you know, as your kind of regular taxpayer who might need to get picked up by a paramedic one day or someone I know might, or family, or hopefully not, or whatever. But anyway, you know, personally for me, it feels quite... it feels safe, actually. I feel safer knowing that, you know, you as a paramedic are taking time to kind of look after yourself, because if you're not, you're not going to be able to be a good paramedic for too many days in a row on end.
Exactly.
Because you'll burn out. And,
you know, there's the physical side of the job. We have to change our body clocks twice a week. It's like being jet lagged all the time. It's the best way I can explain it, really. So, you know, I might do some night shifts at the beginning of the week, have a few days off, and then maybe do some early shifts, or perhaps the other way around. And that has its toll on your own mental health and your physical health. You know, going to bed at 7 p.m. at night to get up at 4 a.m. and then maybe half a week later you're now going to bed at 7 a.m. in the morning to get up at 3 p.m. to then go to work and deal with some of mankind's worst situations, I guess. I mean, you know, most of the time it's all not mankind's worst situations, thankfully. But, you know, we do see some horrible things. It could be. You don't know what you're going to go into. And there's that kind of side, that kind of stress of the job. You're battling the stress of the job, and also you're tired. You know, your shift workers are naturally tired. And it's an emotionally draining job. You don't realise, you know, we don't feel like we're taking things on board sometimes, but actually you are, because you'll do a run of shifts and you think, I am exhausted. I need a day of not talking to anyone, you know, just to have that time of actually, okay, I feel recharged, I can reset, kind of thing. And that's important to ensure that we can keep providing really high quality care to the patients that we see. But no, It's tricky.
Yeah. And as I'm imagining your kind of mindful routine or your awareness practice or whatever you want to call it, which I'm sure kind of really aids you in staying grounded and centered and not kind of losing sight of yourself and over invest in yourself, and that kind of healthy detachment and separation, I suppose. But that is, it's quite, I think meditation in general, it's quite an isolated process. It's something you do on your own. You know,
Definitely.
you don't, unless you go to like a group meditation or whatever. For most people, you kind of, you know, maybe do 10 minutes of meditation in the morning, or your mindfulness practice throughout the day might just be you feeling your feet on the floor or whatever. And I've personally, I'm probably projecting some of my own opinion here, has always found that that's always been the limit to mindfulness and meditation. You know, I can become aware of my own feelings, but then if I'm aware with them, what do I do with them then?
Yeah.
You know, do I just swallow them and kind of still carry them all myself, or do I share them and talk to someone? So I was just kind of curious for you as to whether, once you're aware of a feeling, you know, say you've seen something traumatic in a day that's really bothered you, or you're feeling stressed or emotional or happy or grateful or whatever, where does that go then? Once you're aware of it, you know, do you share with your colleagues or family members? Yeah. What at the point of awareness, what next is basically my question.
So I think as a paramedic, you build some really, really tight relationships with your crewmate on an ambulance, for example. You know, you spend 12-hour periods or up to 12-hour periods on an ambulance with your crewmate, just you and them against the world kind of thing. So you build some really close relationships with work colleagues, and actually it's such a valuable thing to have, because, you know, people that aren't in the job, it's quite hard to explain.
Of course, yeah.
Explain, you know.
I'm trying my best to
Yeah.
put myself in your shoes,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm sure I'm miles off.
So I think colleagues are a massive sort of kind of support network that you have, because, you know, if you did a rough job that was really hard, actually the best thing to do is talk about it with your colleague.
And does that happen regularly?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously we don't talk about specifics and things like that, or we'd never kind of like offload any patient names or anything like that. But in terms of, I went to this today and I found it really hard to deal with, or I had a rough job earlier and I'm feeling a bit stressed about it. Actually, they'll say, do you know what, why don't we go and get a coffee, and we can either have a chat about it or we can chat about anything else but it. You know, if you want to break from it, that's really nice, you know. And actually, I think that's a massive support network that we've got. It is. And being shift workers, you tend to have friends that are all shift workers too, because we all work weekends and we like to work night shifts. So actually the social time does go down because you're working when everyone else is out having fun. But in terms of that, I think that's probably quite a positive, because then there's often people free on a Tuesday morning when you're both off, and you can go, oh, do you know what, can we just go for a cup of coffee, and I've just had a really tough week and I just need to be around someone, kind of thing. And that's lovely. And of course I've got all my friends outside of the job, and you know, they try and understand how it is, because, you know, they hear my stories and things like that, and how I'm feeling, and they're also a fantastic network. Family and friends, I think, definitely, for me, have always been the thing that helps me get through hard things, whether it's work related or not, kind of thing.
I think it's brilliant that at work you feel comfortable to chat to essentially your colleagues about your feelings, because in so many other industries that don't get me wrong, you know, aren't as kind of traumatic and haven't got the same like human nature of it, but you know, most offices, for example, whilst yes, you're not dealing with someone that's just had a heart attack or whatever, you know, there are obviously still things that stress people out at work in any industry, but on the most part, I think a lot of people don't feel able to share with their colleagues how they're really feeling.
Yeah,
So
I think that's definitely sad. And I mean, I can only speak for myself when I say this, but I've always felt like I can talk to my colleagues, you know, I think because we build such intimate relationships with people on station, if on an ambulance all day, being with one person and nobody else for a whole day, for that 12-hour period, you know, we probably won't get back to station for a whole day. So you're just with your crewmate and the patients all day long, and you build that really close bond. And I think, I don't know, I always think because we're exposed to such intimate kind of situations, you know, we'll attend people that are happy to tell me their life story that they haven't even told their husband yet, you know, because I'm that person in the uniform.
you're the trusted professional.
Exactly. And I think because we are continually dealing with these really intimate situations, I find that makes it a bit easier for me to talk about myself, I think, potentially.
I also, from what I'm imagining, is maybe you just can't not. You know what I mean? The job is that stressful by its nature. You kind of like to self-manage and self-regulate. You literally have to share with each other.
And I think there's actually quite we always say that we've got quite a dark humour in the emergency services, because actually sometimes having a little laugh,
big time, yeah,
definitely. Sometimes it sounds awful, but some of the worst situations you can take the funniest of situations from, because that situation was awful.
I think humour's an amazing way to kind of talk about something that can potentially be difficult to talk about.
Definitely. There'll always be somebody that tripped over the bag or something like that that just takes the really hard thing to deal with from that situation and actually move forward with it. And just having that laugh makes everything feel all right. And
you touched on before just about how people begin or patients often share their life stories and stuff with you. It wouldn't be a mental health podcast if we didn't touch on other people's mental health as well, like how regularly are people coming to the emergency services with mental health as something they're going through, and what's your approach to that?
So I don't know the official statistics, but I know from my experience in the last 2 years, I would usually attend somebody who's having a lapse in their mental health or poor mental health, often daily, usually daily, if not multiple times a day. Because it's I always think it's a real emergency. I really do. People that call us think, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called you, and actually everyone's hour of need is different, if that makes sense. So I personally never mind going to somebody that's having a real... I know my colleagues would feel the same, but actually, if someone's feeling very, very low, we attend lots of patients, suicidal patients, patients that self-harming, feeling very low, that kind of thing, having some real nasty experiences. Actually having somebody just come and give you that one-to-one in that exact moment can just be enough to kind of like snap you out of it, if that makes sense, and just get you back and feeling a bit calmer. And I think there's always a limit. Sometimes we get to a certain amount of anxiety where actually we feel rubbish, but we can kind of like, I can do this, but sometimes it goes that little bit more, and you just need that input from somebody else to go, let's look at this rationally. So this has happened, and you're feeling like this. So why don't we come up with plan A, B, or C? And just having somebody with that clear kind of thought process makes you feel a bit better, I always think.
And do you find yourself is giving that support and guidance a lot as well then? Or is there often, are there times when you just can't help some? You know what I mean? Like, is it out of your...
I wouldn't say there's times where I felt like I haven't helped someone, to be perfectly honest with you. There's normally something we can do.
Yeah.
It's not like going to someone that's got a cut arm. You can't just stick a bandage on it and take them to hospital. It's a kind of different approach. And I always think there's not really one way of dealing with somebody that's feeling rubbish, because some people will respond really well to your advice and other people don't want to hear your advice. And I always think that's okay, because when I was feeling rubbish, I didn't want to listen to this lady that told me to download the breathing app, but so I think you have to kind of like listen to people. I think that's often the biggest kind of skill I can say that I use the most. It just actually just give somebody 20 minutes to tell you how they're feeling, and just be that pair of ears for them, and just sometimes getting it off your chest actually really makes a huge difference, definitely.
So you play the role of the confidant and the counsellor a little bit as well.
Yeah, definitely. Paramedics, the role is changed a lot from what it used to be, but essentially it used to kind of be a deliver to hospital role. Nowadays it's completely different. We go from counsellor to midwife. We go from everything, every end of the medical spectrum. There's no limit to what we can attend. Any reason somebody might call 999, you're gonna have a 999 ambulance turning up. So it's a tricky job. It's a hard job. It's a really good job, and it's a really rewarding job. It's not an easy one. Definitely not an easy one. But,
and what you've just touched on around mental health and how supporting people kind of touches on my belief as well, that I think you can give practical advice, you can tell people what to do. I'm not sure how sustainable that is for someone getting to kind of, whether it's recovery or to personal growth in some way, you know. And I just believe most of us just want to be heard.
Definitely.
You know, we just want a space to chat to someone, whether that's a therapist, a counsellor, a friend, family member, a paramedic. You know, that seems to be what most people want.
Exactly. It's true. I think just being that pair of ears can make all the difference, whether it's at 3 p.m. in the day or 1 a.m. in the morning. Just having someone come to your house, you know, and in your hour of need, you know, they could be having the worst emotions imaginable, and just having somebody there who cares actually makes a real difference. It really does. And we do care as paramedics. We really do care, you know, and I think that's a really great service that we offer.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Nick. It's been amazing to hear your story. I think we can all, I mean, to be honest, I think everyone can take away something from this. Like, we're not all paramedics, but even if you kind of, you know, I work behind a desk. Honestly, the only time I use my hands is to write emails. But I can still relate to a lot of the feelings that you've been talking about, and I think your approach, which I hope many other people take, of kind of practicing awareness, but then also having a way of sharing that with colleagues, friends, and family is it really is admirable. You know, I think it's something that we can all take on. So thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.